Hello, and welcome back to another episode of 8-Bit Monsters. On today's episode, we're going to take a look at the Piercer, another low-level monster that players may encounter in their Hell levels. Today's monster is a CR 1/2, something a little higher than what we normally look at, but it does fall in line with the possibility of players encountering from levels 1 to 3. Let's start by taking a look at the hit points, AC, and other items of the monster before we dive into the DCR and OCR. Our Piercer has an average of 22 hit points and has a natural armor class of 15. This is actually pretty high compared to the last few monsters that we've looked at. Next, I wanted to take a look at the skills that the Piercer has. Now, the only skill that it has is Stealth. The reason I wanted to look at this is because of the +5 bonus that it gets, and some DMs may be wondering, well, why does this Piercer have such a high Stealth? Well, the Stealth comes from three things in this case. The Piercer has a +1 from its dex, as well as being proficient in Stealth, giving it a +2, and then being an expert at Stealth as well, giving it an extra +2 since we double its proficiency bonus. And since the Piercer is only a CR 1/2, its proficiency bonus is only going to be at +2, therefore it doubles to 4, we add in its dex bonus, and it gets a Stealth score of +5. Now, in some cases, some monsters may also have more skills, traits, resistances in this area that we may need to calculate into the monster's overall CR. But in this case, we don't have to worry about that, so I just wanted to make a note that even though the stealth skill was pretty high, it's not going to affect our monster, but gives you an understanding of what's going on with this monster and its skills. Next, let's look at the traits. This time, the Piercer has two traits, False Appearance and Spider Climb. Now, if we were to look at the monster traits in the Dungeons Master's Guide and go down the list of traits that are available, at least from when the books were printed, both False Appearance and Spider Climb actually give no effect to the monster when it comes to calculating its CR. Therefore, we can skip right past this section and not have to worry about what's going on with the Piercer and any little extra bonuses that may be affecting its defenses and its offenses. With those out of the way, let's jump right into the DCR. When we look at our Piercer's DCR, we're going to start with its hit points and see where the 22 falls in line for its DCR. When we look at the monster stats by CR, we'll see that 22 hit points gives our Piercer a DCR of 1/8. Next, we'll take a look at the armor class of our Piercer, and this time it has a natural armor class of 15. Following the rules for calculating a monster's DCR, we'll find that 15 is actually 2 points over the expected rating of 13 for a monster with a DCR of 1/8. Well, what do we do in this case? As we always do, we actually increase it by 1, moving our DCR from 1/8 to 1/4. Next, we move on to the OCR. Now, this is an interesting section because when I first looked at the Piercer, I noticed that the monster only had one attack. Unlike most monsters, they'll usually have a bite, or a slash, or a sword attack, or some kind of weapon that can be used repeatedly. When I read through the monster's description for drop, I found that it only actually gets one attack, and then it has to climb all the way back up to the top of the ceiling and drop again to attack whatever it's trying to attack. This is a very special case for our monster and monsters in general. This monster doesn't get multiple attack rounds, it gets one chance. That's it, it's pretty much done if it hasn't killed its target in one shot. So this leaves a very interesting range of calculations to figure out, because either this monster is going to be very underpowered or very overpowered. Now, in the description of drop, it states that the monster gets 1d6 per 10 feet that it falls to a maximum of 21 damage for 60 feet. Anything over 60 feet doesn't help the Piercer whatsoever and only stays at that 21 average damage. When we take a look at the monster dropping in intervals of 10 feet, we find that at 10 feet, the monster will be dealing 3.5 damage on average. When we compare this to our chart, we find that 3.5 damage, rounding down as D&D states, is 1/8. Next, we look at 20 feet fall damage and find that the average for that is 7 points of damage. This nets us at 1/2 OCR. Already we have a big jump from 1/8 to 1/2. Now what happens if our monster drops from 30 feet? Well, that's an average of 10.5 damage, and comparing that to our monster stats by CR, we find that 10.5 damage is equivalent to CR1. Already we're starting to jump into territory where our monster has a higher attack rating and a lower defensive rating. So next let's look at 40 feet. This averages out to 14 damage, and when we compare it to our chart, we find that it's also falling into the CR1. Here we have an interesting set of two numbers where 30 and 40 feet will roughly average out to be the same OCR. Let's move on to 50 feet. This averages out to 17.5 damage, and this puts us in the OCR range of 2. This is really heavy damage here. This is a lot higher than expected. Okay, if 50 feet is netting us at an OCR of 2, what happens at 60 feet? Well, at 60 feet, we have an average of 21 damage, and when we compare the 21 damage to our monster stats chart, we find that 21 damage actually puts us into the OCR range of 3. 3. That's incredible damage. That is higher than when we looked at the troglodyte. I didn't think it could get any worse, but I should know better. Alright, we have a huge range here of OCR 1/8 to OCR 3, depending on how far the piercer falls. Now that we've talked about the average damage that our piercer is attacking with, let's take a look at the attack bonus. The piercer has an attack bonus of +3. When we compare that +3, there's nothing else from the piercer's traits that is modifying its attack bonus. So luckily we can take the +3 attack bonus and compare it to the monster stats chart. When we do that, we find that the attack rating is well within range of each expected attack bonus for the damage that this monster can put out. Even at CR3, our monster only has a +4 expected attack bonus, and that +3 that it has naturally won't modify the attack bonus or its OCR. Let's compare all of these OCRs to the DCR and see what our final CR value can be depending on how far the piercer falls. Our piercer's DCR is never going to change at 1/4. But when we compare that with the OCRs of 1/8 to 3, we get a variety of ranges. So when we take and add the 1/4 to 1/8, we get a total of 3/8. Divide that in half, and we get into this sticky position of do we round down or do we round up? And the final OCR when a piercer falls at 10 feet can be anywhere between 1/8 to 1/4. Okay, 1/8 and 1/4 is under the rating of 1/2. Let's step up to the next OCR and see what that rating is at. So we take our 1/4 DCR, add it to 1/2 DCR, and we get a total of 3/4. Divide it in half, and again we're at this weird sticky point of is it a 1/4 or a 1/2? So there's a possibility that at 20 feet our piercer is actually doing enough damage that the printed CR value of 1/2 is correct. There's a little bit of wiggle room, like I said, because do we round down? Do we round up? That's for you to decide as a DM. Next, let's take a look at 30 and 40 feet and see how that works out. So for these two, we're adding our 1/4 DCR to an OCR of 1. This gives us a 1 1/4 CR, which we divide in half, and we find that this divides right down to 1/2 once we round down. This is the actual printed value of our piercer at 1/2. Excluding the 20-foot fall because of the wiggle room that's in the final CR, if our piercer is to drop from 30 to 40 feet high, we're actually getting the piercer at the printed value of CR 1/2. Now that we've looked at those numbers, let's take a look at what happens when our monster drops from 50 and 60 feet. This is where it gets pretty bad. Looking at 50 feet, we take our DCR of 1/4 and add it to our OCR of 2. This gives us a 2.5 CR, which has to be divided in half. And then we round down because it'll be closest to our CR value of 1. So now we've gone a step up higher than the printed value when it drops at 50 feet. This is getting into the territory of, oh boy, we're going to kill our players. If we're going to end up killing our players at a 50-foot drop, how bad is a 60-foot drop? Well, let's take a look at the 60-foot drop and add the DCR of 1/4 to the OCR of 3. We then get 3 1/4 CR, which is divided in half and rounded down, and this ends up with a final CR value of 2. That's a lot of damage. At 60 feet, A final value of 2 is deadly to any of our players from levels 1 to 3. This is just another point of the hell levels and why our players like to skip and go right to level 3. Although I do have some notes as to what may be going on here and what to expect. So let's get into the notes section. First, let's talk about the piercer dropping from 30 to 40 feet. Because of how varied our piercer's attack range is, I think D&D expected the piercer to drop for anywhere between 20 to 40 feet. And that's not to mention if there are more than just one piercer up in the ceiling. With that in mind, I think that 30 to 40 feet is the average that the piercer is expected to drop. Let's take a look at the next point I have here, and that's the monster only gets one attack, which means it only gets one chance to kill. Which means if that piercer with only one attack misses, it needs to climb all the way back up to where it started from and try and drop again. And the piercer only moves at 5 feet a turn. Max 10 feet if it's also dashing. This piercer only gets one attack because players are going to jump on that piercer and defeat that piercer before it gets another chance to harm or kill any of the other team members. Now that we've looked at that note, let's take a look at one last note I have about this piercer. Its senses. Now if we go back to that section of the piercer, we find that the piercer has blind sight at 30 feet, dark vision at 60 feet, and a passive perception of 8. With a passive perception of 8, players are easily able to sneak past piercers provided that their sneak value is high enough. Now for some reason players aren't able to sneak past a piercer. The piercer's only going to be able to tell if the players are there within 60 feet. If a piercer is higher than 60 feet, there's no reason to have a piercer in that area of the dungeon or cave system or whatever to drop on players because they can't see them. Now that we've had a chance to look at the final CR values and take a look at some of my notes, what do I think about the piercer? Provided that the piercer drops from anywhere between 20 to 40 feet, I think this is a perfectly balanced monster that any DM should use. If it's dropping at 10 feet or 50 and 60 feet, it's a waste or it's too deadly. With that in mind, I personally wouldn't use a piercer beyond those ranges because I like to give my players a difficult combat encounter. So I would try and keep that in mind, that the monster should only be used between 20 to 40 feet up, and then maybe use a couple of them that drop sporadically. Instead of having all the piercers drop, have drop one on the first turn, have another drop on the second turn, have a third one drop, and that's if your XP budget or your encounter building from Xanathar's Guide allows you to have more than one piercer. Thank you for watching another Monster Deconstruction video from D&D 5th edition. If you've enjoyed this video, like it, subscribe, and hit that bell icon to see when I post another video discussing monsters from D&D 5th edition. Until next time when we deconstruct another monster from D&D 5th edition, take care everyone, and I'll see you next time.